Hello and welcome to Weird Heat. I'm Brian Altano. This tall man is Max Scoville, and today we're talking about travel.
Travel. What a fun concept. This is actually a really good one to talk about because I just got back from 2 weeks in Japan, and you were in Austin shooting a travel show. We travel a lot for work. Yeah, this is a thing I feel like we have some area of expertise on.
Yeah, it's also a thing that I personally feel like really connected to. I think it's like enriching. I think it's spiritually uplifting. I think it's great. I think it's also tremendously fucking frustrating sometimes. Like it's very interesting. My take on travel is effectively, and I've made this reference to you many times, but I think a lot. It's sort of a lot like planning a wedding, where even if you have a small one, there's the same shit you have to do no matter what. Like, you were in Japan for 2 weeks. I was in Austin for 5 days. We both probably brought a similar size suitcase because of how much or how little you're able to pack into it and how much you have to move around. But no matter where you go, whether it's overnight or if it's for a couple of weeks or a couple of days, you need the same sort of 10 basic things. And so packing is kind of a pain in the ass, but traveling and going somewhere is kind of great.
Yeah, the nuts and bolts are really sort of the same thing. You have the same highs and the same lows. I feel like travel is one of those things that's really scary if you haven't done it a whole lot, and it's very easy to kind of blow it out of proportion in your head. But and it's also there's the misconception of, like, when you think travel, you think like, oh, it's going to be a backpacking through Europe. It doesn't necessarily have to be that. You know, there's like a lot you could go. Like, you could go to a town you've never been to, like an hour and a half away or less than that. You know?
Even for the day, or like, I like to do the thing where I'll just, like, a cool thing about living in California is that, like, you can pretty much drive a couple hours in any direction and be somewhere completely different than where you are currently. Especially us living in and around a major metropolitan area, that gets kind of, I don't know, psychopathic and stuffy and annoying at times. So it's good to sort of get out and go see some trees.
Yeah. No, I think also, like, travel's a luxury. Travel's not a thing that's most people can afford. Like, I feel like it's a thing that's worth talking about. I didn't really travel until I was an adult. I went, let's see, I don't know, it was just me and my mom growing up, and like we went to Washington D.C. once, and we went to Cape Cod once, and other than like visiting my aunt in Vermont, like doing like family trips like that, like we didn't really get to go anywhere. Which was kind of a bummer, because my mom would always talk about like her travels when she was younger, and she was all over the world and got to see all kinds of cool shit. But like, I didn't get on an airplane for the first time until I was like 14.
Oh, wow.
And then I didn't fly internationally until I was working. Like, the first time I left the country was when I was for a video game press trip.
Really?
Yeah, like I had to get my passport to go see Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes. Like,
oh, wow.
Yeah, it was weird.
Yeah.
And I mean, you've traveled like your whole life. You got to go.
Yeah, that was like, I mean, I think that came from the fact that my dad growing up was really, he was a teacher, and he did a lot of lectures, and he would get asked to show up at like weird conferences and stuff like that. Like, and to me as a kid, that was so foreign, but like as an adult, that's a major part of my job. So it's weird. But also the fact that my mom came here when she was like 16, and from Italy. And so I don't think she particularly loved it here. So she had an excuse to go back all the time. And being an adult, I realized that my dad and my mom would go to Italy a lot, and they would take me as a kid. But while they were there, my mom would want to spend time with family, and my dad would be like, your family is like 7 like sweaty Italians sitting in a 1-bedroom apartment, and it's 115 degrees and they hate air conditioning. So how about we go see your family for 5 days, and then we get on a train and we go fucking literally anywhere else. So I would tag along in these trips because I was a kid. And so I got to see a lot of Europe when I was really young because, we would go to this small town, Molfetta, on the southern coast of Italy. And it was like cobblestone streets and everything. It was completely different than anything I knew. And then we would get there, and after like 4 or 5 days, we'd be like, this is horrible. Or my mom would be like, this is the greatest. And my dad would go, okay, it's time to go to Rome or Venice or something else. And we'd get these like cheap hotels and blah, blah, blah. But my dad was kind of like a white trash guy. He's like the son of a truck driver. And
Son of a truck driver.
And when we weren't going to Europe, we would do trips like we would drive to Florida and go to Disney World, or we would like pack in the car. And that's when I got really into like handheld gaming and like me and my two brothers would just like pile into like a big van and basically just like put pillows and blankets in the
old John Hughes family road trip.
Totally. All of those like, you know, Chevy Chase like family vacation movies and shit. Like I lived those growing up.
Oh man, yeah. So growing up, it was just me and my mom, and she didn't even have a car when I was a kid. Like we lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's a city. You don't need a car. You take the subway or the bus or whatever. You walk. And so whenever we'd go to visit my aunt in Vermont, which is like probably like a 3-hour drive, she'd have to rent a car, and it would be like this weird like luxury of like, ooh, a car. What are we doing in this car? And like that new car smell was like really exciting to me. And it was like, and then a lot of the sort of the family visits, vacations and shit we did were actually visiting my uncle who was very sick. So it wasn't like a fun, like, let's go, you know, like let's go do this thing. It was like we went back and forth between like the Boston area and like Connecticut, where I later moved to. I think over the summer of like 94, I think we made like maybe 5 or 6 trips. And it was like basically my mom would work all week, and then on the weekends we'd go and like help fucking deal with my uncle's bullshit. Like he's like hoarder house, and get him into a nursing home and shit like that. And so I have all these like weird sort of fond childhood memories of like the Mass Turnpike, which is not a good time, you know?
Yeah, which is like, I think to infer that this episode is specifically about travel and not specifically about vacation. Because vacation is like, there's a rewarding end result there.
We travel for work all the time, and we have like really cool jobs. We have dream jobs, and I don't ever want to look that gift horse in the mouth.
Definitely not.
But at the same time, like when, you know, somebody's like, hey, you got to go to Anaheim. It's like, am I going to Disneyland with my best friends? It's like, no, you're going to, you know, work a show, or you're going to be there for an appointment or whatever. And it's like, it's, you know, it's still a fun thing underlying, but like, you know, there's no part of me that's like, oh, I've always wanted to see the fine land of Anaheim.
Yeah,
no offense, Anaheim.
I think the way the world is designed now, a lot of people travel for work, and it's cool to see. Like I have friends that don't work anywhere near the video game industry, and they travel, or family, and they travel all the time, and they're in really cool cities. And the running theme with all of it is that it's not necessarily vacationing. It's fun because it gets you out of the office, but it's effectively you're going somewhere and you're staying, you know, in a conference center, or you're going to a hotel in one of those big conference rooms, and you're watching some sort of seminar and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember like the idea of traveling for work. There's that sort of that trope of like, you know, the dad who's away on business trips, again in John Hughes movies, like that. You know, there's that image of like the sort of paternal figure coming in the door with like lots of bags and boxes, and like maybe there's a souvenir from the airport, and the idea of like who buys gifts at the airport. It's like, it's people who travel a lot and maybe don't necessarily have time to actually.
It's what I just did in Austin, because I was on 3 12-hour shoot days in a row, and I like to bring my wife home something from like these trips I do, and at the airport I was like, I'll get some, what's that? Salsa. They love that in Texas.
Sure, why not?
You know, what do you guys have? What's your specialty? And like sometimes you don't realize what a city is known for until you get to the airport, and even then you get like a sort of fake cartoon version of it. You know, like when I was leaving Austin, one of the big things they do, I forget what they're even called, but it's just like basically like pecan clusters covered in chocolate, and I'm like, sure, great, let's get some of those. And they're like, oh, those are like 6 for $35. And I was like, that seems excessive, but sure, I don't want to come home empty-handed. And so like I think that like that's a really interesting part of it, is that sort of when you get somewhere, you're able to get a like hyper-focused assessment of what that place is. And what I find enriching about that is that it then changes your perspective on things. Like we've been to Seattle a lot, and you've been to Portland a lot, and those are cool cities because it makes you go like, oh, that's the best coffee I've ever had, or you know, and like you take some of that culture with you and you bring it back home. And I think a lot of people don't travel because they're like, I don't need to go anywhere. I have everything I need right here. And they're not wrong. I mean,
with travel, like you talk about like the tourism industry or like the travel industry, and I think there's a fine line between a location kind of maintaining its own identity and its own culture, and at the same time being accommodating to guests and people from other places. And you see like there's always every major city has like the touristy area, and some of it's kind of like trying to you know, sort of hornswoggle some rubes, you know, like you go to Times Square, and there's all these places that it's like, hey, it's New York's finest shitty pizza, and it's like, go like 4 blocks any direction, you'll find better pizza, you know, that kind of
totally
thing. And I mean, in San Francisco we have Fisherman's Wharf, And there, it's like a lot of stuff that isn't really representative of San Francisco. You know,
it's weird here too because it's like Times Square is in the middle of New York City, so you almost have to interface with it, even as a local. Like you can bob and weave around it, but at some point, like you're gonna pop your head up and be like, ah, shit, I'm in Times Square again. Whereas Fisherman's Wharf is like totally tucked on the outskirts of the city, and it's not really something that you're not really getting there.
No, it's out of the way. It's a pain in the ass to get to, and it's a pain in the ass to get through if you're there. And there's all this weird, like, I don't know, there'll be like a dude painted gold who's doing like the Thriller dance, and he's blaring music, and there's like, you know, like the last time I was at Fisherman's Wharf, it was because I was trying to get me and my wife little figurines 3D printed of us for our cake toppers for our wedding, and like that's the kind of place that, like, I guess if you're on vacation, you're like, oh wow, 3D printing. We don't have that in Rancho Cucamonga or wherever the fuck you're from. And so like there's all these weird sort of like little pop-up shops like that are these things that aren't really like there's a magic store there. Yeah. There's like a spy gear store. And it's kind of like a weird, like almost like a silly mall.
It is. There's like a Ripley's Believe It or Not, and like a wax museum.
It's like an old-timey, like a coin-operated like
fucking
steampunk arcade or something.
Rainforest cafes and shit.
Right.
So it's so weird. And it's this weird sort of connection of all of these like kind of tchotchke touristy things, but then also like goofy novelty shit because people just want to have fun on vacation.
Yeah, because people on vacation they want to fuck around. But
and you totally get it. You know,
there's this funny balance because like if you actually want to get into like the heart of the city and like really find its actual culture, I feel like for San Francisco that would be somewhere like the Mission. You know, and I mean in New York, I don't even like what would you say is like the most sort of defining?
Probably like West Village. That's usually where I go, where I'm sort of just like this is or that. I mean, if you want to walk around Midtown and like get dinner and go to some bars, like Murray Hill's a good place to go. But yeah, I usually go to the West Village because I'm like, this feels like there's still like dive bars and record shops and good pizza stores and like
but if
good
you're
coffee
like,
shops.
If you're like a kind of buttoned up, like play it safe, vacation dad, maybe that's a little bit too rough around the edges to check out. I mean, of course. And you see this. I've been to Vietnam 3-4 times now, a bunch of times. Vietnam is a weird country because it is one of its biggest industries is tourism. And obviously there's a ton of culture there, but it's also like culture that's been filtered through a variety of like sort of occupations over the centuries. And so like a lot of Vietnamese cooking is informed by French cooking, like the banh mi sandwiches. Like they historically don't have baguettes in Asia. That was the thing that came over. And so there's some of that, and there's obviously like local stuff, but there's also like how do you appeal to Western travelers or for people from other parts of the world? And how do you like, and there's this kind of like we've stayed at like local hotels that are trying to appeal to foreigners, and it's really interesting because like there's some stuff where they just like they don't get it, like there's stuff that just doesn't quite click. Like they cut corners some places, or they didn't quite, do one of the things or the other. And it's like, personally, I'd be sort of okay with them just being like, yeah, here's what the locals do. Here's the local customs. But that's sort of like, that's a kind of compromise you have to make when you're traveling, Yeah. And at the same time, sometimes it's reassuring to be like give me something that's entirely familiar. Like there's this homogeny that's really popular with hotels and motels. Like I feel like the movie Up in the Air did it really well.
Yes.
Where they're talking about how like every hotel room is sort of the same, and it's Fight Club does it well too, where it's like they all start to blend together.
Yeah, it's weird. I actually I sort of like I like the idea of like hotel culture. I like walking into a hotel. Like there's something quaint about like everything being in its right place. It's sort of this like bento box approach. It feels like getting like dinner on like an international flight on an airplane where they just give you this little box and they're like, here's your brownie, here's your salad.
It's a nice surprise. I just wish that hotels and motels like managed to kind of maintain that different like local theme approach. Like you maybe get like, I don't know, like maybe here's like I stayed in a motel in like like Pismo Beach or something, and it had like a bunch of wagon wheels and like Wild West bullshit everywhere, and I was like, this is kind of cool. I like this. It's got like a fake like mesa stucco front. I think like you don't get a lot of that.
No, because they all sort of get art from the same warehouses, and so they have these like weird asymmetrical paintings and stuff like that. I actually find the older I get, I remember being a kid and thinking that like hotels were a huge luxury, but traveling as an adult, I find that hotels are actually it's me sort of letting go of a lot of the consistencies I have in my own adult home. Like I would travel constantly if I was rich enough to always check an extra bag with my own pillows. Like I am at war with pillows in hotels constantly. I'm at war with like hotel coffee machines. Like I almost feel like it's sort of like how drug addicts act, where they're like, oh, I have to go to this place, but like, how will I get my fix?
You gotta have your own kit.
Yeah,
you gotta have that like little rolled up leather sleeve with your spoon and your lighter in it.
Yeah,
like
really.
You bring your French press on the road with you.
Seriously, because I get somewhere and I'm like, they have this like disgusting old plastic thing with these like those green tree pouches or whatever the fuck they're called.
Yeah,
I mean, like having like a fan on or like some air conditioning or something, and you have to let go of all that.
Yeah, and it's it's kind of a roll of the dice. You never know what you can read Yelp reviews and shit, but like there's still that level of like it's always going to be a little bit different. You never know exactly how it's gonna go. I think when you talk about like when you complain about travel, you complain about like different hotels. There's a sort of like it sounds almost snobbish, but it becomes like anything else. The more exposure you have to it, the more like a basis of comparison you have. Mm-hmm. I remember the first motel I ever stayed in. We were in Vermont visiting my aunt, and like I think they had renovations going on or some shit, so we couldn't stay in their guest room. And so my aunt was like, "Oh, I found a good motel for you guys," and my mom was bitching about it the entire time because it was apparently a very shitty motel, but it was the first motel I ever stayed in. So I was like, "This place is wild. They've got like free shampoo." I remember there was AstroTurf on the patio. It was definitely like in hindsight. It was very tacky.
Right.
Like it was definitely like one of those kind of like Bates Motel type of like fuck. It was kind of a dive.
God, that's great.
But I was like super into it. I probably would be really into it now still. But my mom was like, "Oh, I can't believe my sister recommended this. This is horrible." And I was like,
well, I think people like it sounds snobby to complain about hotels, but people complain about them because it costs as much as it does to buy a PS4 to go to bed one night.
Like, yeah, I mean, depending where you're staying.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of places where it's like upwards of $100, $200, $300.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah, easy.
Yeah, easily, right? And like I don't know, you could have bought a TV for your bedroom or something. Like
yeah,
that.
traveling is not cheap, and then you get into plane tickets are another story entirely. Yeah, I mean, traveling is like it's like when you dig into what it actually is, it's really just going somewhere not permanently. I guess that's sort of it. Whether that's for work or for vacation or for just sort of exploring. Mm-hmm. One of the best trips I ever had, I went to this town in the middle of nowhere, California, called Dunsmuir. And the reason I went there is that my wife got a Groupon for like a lake house, or it was like a ski resort kind of getaway type of thing. But it was being a Groupon, it was off season, so like all the snow had melted, and it was still too shitty out to go explore or do anything. Right. Like it was like, and it's in like up by like Lake Shasta, and we go to this little. We drove on the way up. We drove through this little town called Dunsmuir, and we're like, Dunsmuir. This looks like they kill people here, which is fucking bogus of me because I grew up in towns like like Stephen King ass New England towns where like I know what a scary town looks like, and I'm like, this is quaint. But I was still like, ooh, this place is full of specters and chilling phantasms.
They kill people in every town.
Exactly,
now.
Yeah. Major cities have lots of murder. But we rolled through it and we're like, oh, let's get the fuck out of here. And then we went to our little cabin and it was fine, hung out and watched the movies and fucked around. And then we're like, let's, like day 2 or whatever, we're like, let's go explore. Let's go check out that haunting town of Dunsmuir. And we roll through and it was like, I don't know, a different time of day. And we completely fell in love with this complete, like this town's claim to fame. And I'm totally going to blow up its spot right here. But its claim to fame is that it has the coldest drinking water in all of California.
Wow.
Or like the best drinking water. And so in honor of this...
The best or the coldest? Those are very different things.
I don't know. Look, it's on the Wikipedia page.
Because you could have really foggy drinking water that's ice cold.
But it's named after a railroad magnate who was like some Scottish dude named Dunsmuir who like helped lay train tracks. And it was like, awesome. So it had this weird kind of like... Obviously, there's not a lot of train shit going on in 2018. And I think you can take Amtrak up there, but like it's kind of, and it's on one of the I think it's on Highway 5 or something. So if you're driving up to like Portland or whatever, you maybe roll through it, but like it has like a bunch of like lovely little antique stores and some surprisingly good restaurants. And we just hung out there and we're like, this place is like really just completely charming. And it was completely by chance that we found it. Like there was no like, TripAdvisor. There was no like direction. There was no like Yelp thing being like, you've got to check out Crazy Dunsmuir. And they have like in the center of town, they have like a little water fountain that's always going to be like, try our water. It's great here.
I love that.
It's adorable. It's super lovely. It reminded me of like the town I grew up in. And like, I don't know, like that's the thing that I really love is that sense of discovery and that sense of kind of finding something. And it's not discovery. Obviously people live there. People like already discovered it, and I'm sure people discovered it before that. Like that's the kind of thing about travel is you get this false sense of sort of, oh, I found this and I made this my own.
But there's also like you come back and I think you're slightly changed for the better. Like I've always believed in that like you go somewhere and you try something and you see something and maybe you realize like that place has worse shit than I have, and you go, I love my shit, or you go, that place has better shit than I have, or I want to strive to get some better shit. You know,
the worst pizza I ever had was in Vietnam.
Really?
It had French fries on it.
I feel like there's a lot of people in America that would really love that.
It was like Vietnamese French fries on Vietnamese pizza. I think the place was called Pizza Hug, so it was like a bootleg Pizza Hut.
I think that like you mentioned like the sort of like the train guy, and it got me thinking about how I know a lot of people that travel based around basically their mode of transportation when traveling is based around the thing that they aren't doing constantly day to day for work. Like I have a friend on the East Coast who he basically commutes like 45 minutes each way or an hour each way to work in his car, and he's in his car constantly. And when it's time for vacation and for travel, he gets on a fucking plane. And like the idea of him doing a road trip to him, he's just like, no, I do that all week. I hate that. Like when it's time to travel, I get on a plane. And for me, like I always read those stories about like, and I always wanted to do it. And I do it when I go to like Europe or Tokyo and stuff like that. Of just like getting on a train for a couple hours and like those weird Amtraks where they give you dinner and you can go to bed and stuff like that.
We did that one. It was very weird.
Really?
Where'd
you guys do it?
We went to God damn it. It's like central coast area. It's near Pismo Beach. It's like I forget the name of it every
time. California?
Yeah. And it was like it was funny because we got there and I looked around, I'm like, God damn it! This is exactly like the town. This is like Sonoma. This is a carbon copy of like this is a farm town that leaned into being a wine town, and now they're putting on airs and opening up art galleries, and there's a town square and a liquor store and a pizza place. I'm like, God, fucking! I've already been here, but it was fine still.
Yep.
But on the train ride down, it's like you're like, who rides the train in 2018? And the answer to that is like old people, hipsters, and degenerates and
drunks.
Definitely. I mean, there's a lot of sort of, all the above in there. But my wife walked in on some dude jerking off in the bathroom and he didn't lock the door, which was the weird part. But
That's horrible.
It was just some dude just like fucking cranking it on a train, which was like, and I feel like that sends a bad, like a
how long was the train ride?
I think it's like 3 hours, maybe. No, it's more than that. It's weird though because it's more expensive.
How do you not
than
go
flying.
3 hours without masturbating?
On train's a sexy vehicle. It's always going through tunnels and shit.
Sure, it's got that grind, that hopping, grinding sound.
Yeah, you're like, nobody will look for masturbators on the train. The bus, sure, not this train. I don't know.
It's made of steel rods.
No, it was a good time though. Like I wish that there were more trains in America. Like in Japan they have a rail system that actually functions.
Yep.
I don't know why that is. I think maybe because they had an automotive industry that could coexist with their existing infrastructure, unlike America.
No, I mean, I take the train to and from work every single day. So like the idea of like getting on a train and just sitting there for 4 hours is like weird to me. But I took a train from Paris to Barcelona and it was just like fucking wonderful.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was Barcelona to Nice.
And we have a fantastically garbage rail system here in San Francisco. And like, that's not even like I don't know. For how big San Francisco is, it should be like, oh yeah, let's just take the zip line. We'll get from one side to the other, and it's just like it's because of earthquakes and sand and all sorts of bullshit.
I do a thing where when I travel to a new city, and I do this a lot here in America, is I go like, what is this city's thing? Like, what's their thing? And like when I went to Portland, it's like, oh, you guys, like, your thing is like keep Portland weird. You're really into like great coffee. Like you have awesome restaurants, strip clubs, biscuits, like,
breakfast,
beer, cocktails, shit like that. And you're like, okay, this is
leather
really cool.
goods.
Yeah. And then you turn the corner and there's like axes and like Doug fir trees and all this shit. The fuck it is. And then, and then you go to Seattle and they're like, oh, well, we birthed like, all these great like music, like revolutions from the 90s. And then like they back to the airports thing, it always boils it down to like, oh, well, did you love Nirvana growing up? Well, guess what? You can buy Nevermind on vinyl at the airport. And you're like, who would do that? Or they're like, you guys like Starbucks? It started here. And you're like, yeah, but that's not really like a small town, timey thing anymore.
I've got this stupid goof I keep doing wherever somebody's like, I'm going to this place. I think of the most stereotypical shit from there. And I'm like, try the blank. I hear it's great. Like someone's like, I'm going to Hawaii. And I'm like, try the shaved ice. I hear it's great.
Yep.
And like, this is one of those things. I do that because I think it's funny. I don't think they ever think it's funny or they think I'm an idiot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is amusing to me.
Well, a lot of these places, they're centered, like you mentioned Anaheim. If you took Disney out of Anaheim, I don't know what that place would be anymore. Like it's effectively guppies and whales. Like it is all of these kind of, what are they? Mollusks, those things that like stick to the, how do you say that word? Mollusks. How do you say it with
mollusks?
See? Mollusks. Just
Why are you saying it like that?
You just said it like that too. Try it again.
Mollusks?
See? You do
I think
like,
there's an echo in here, which is screwing us up.
Like
If I get like headphones, I could probably say it better.
The fucking things. I should have said barnacles. They like stick to whales.
I think it's like a citadel.
Yeah.
In olden medieval times, where like you've got this giant kind of walled, attraction. This like, like any major theme park, like Disney does this, and it's what's really weird to me is that. Like Walt Disney had a hard-on for orange groves. It's also was probably really cheap land, which is another thing. And so like the Disneyland in California and Disney World in Orlando are both like in orange lands. They're both like there are a bunch of like orange groves and stuff. And then once those sprung up, the land around them like people started creating these like souvenir shops and hotels and all this like that movie. What the fuck is it called? The Florida one, Florida Project.
Yeah,
Florida Project is like haunting because it's like, hey, here's a people living directly outside of Disney World.
Yeah. Here's what it's like when like the barnacles are too far to reach the whale, basically. The interesting thing about traveling too is that like you will, and it's why I think people love, they love sort of like. Self-contained, all-inclusive resorts. I've been to places like that where they basically, like Dominican Republic, they don't let you leave more than like 600 square feet in any direction. And you get a wristband, all of your food is there, all of your drinks are there, there's a beach and a pool, and you get it. You don't have to think. Your brain shuts off. Everything is taken care of, and it's kind of nice. And it's also the kind of thing that you can replicate. Disney is the same thing. You go to Disney World and you go like, this hasn't really changed dramatically from trip to trip, but I've gone to like Carmel, California with my wife and had the best weekend of our lives, and then gone back 2 years later, and it's just been like things just didn't line up right, or like we're just not in a great mood, or like the restaurants aren't as good or whatever.
I mean, that's tapping in more to like the vacation side of things. And I think there's that whole like ideal golden family vacation of like, how do we have a trip where everyone's safe, everyone has a good time, everything's taken care of, and it's all hunky-dory and good. And like if you try to go all Clark Griswold and go off the beaten path and explore things, then shit inevitably backfires. But like the idea of like resorts is to try to control that. I've stayed in resorts more than I would have liked to, which is a weird thing to complain about. But on a few of my Vietnam trips, which were like going along with my wife's family, they're kind of wary of like what's going on in Vietnam with good reason. There's like some shady shit that goes down there. And so they're like, we've got like 11, younger, it's like me and my wife and her cousins and all of their, all the various family members, the kids, so to speak, even though we're all like in our 30s. And they're like, these fucking idiots are going to pound shots and get abducted. Like let's put them someplace where they can pound shots and not get abducted.
It's a good idea.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, let's put the kids in the play area.
It's also like, it's sort of reliable. And I think that like when you spend all this time traveling and all this money getting to somewhere, it's sort of nice to know that when you get there, you can kind of count on shit.
Which I feel like defeats the purpose of travel entirely.
Yeah, it's weird, right? Because there is that notion of getting out of your comfort zone, but there's also that sort of like, I went through all of this, I better have a bed like when I get there. Right now in San Francisco, the Marriott hotels are on strike, and you can't walk by them without them screaming into bullhorns and banging on things.
To be fair, protest is a good part of the San Francisco culture. So you're
very
getting
true.
The authentic San Francisco lifestyle there.
But we've like regularly walked by and seen people like with all their bags and their kids and their wives, just like just kind of shaking on the phone trying to book another hotel because they came all the way from Europe and they got here and it's like some shit just didn't work. You know, when I was in Austin, they had gotten rain for so long that the reservoirs had overflowed and no one could touch or drink tap water anywhere.
Holy shit.
So we couldn't go anywhere with that. Like everywhere we went was just bottled water. And it's like, okay, well this is scary, but it's also like we can work with this. And it's like if I had, you know, saved up for 3 years to go on vacation there and I got there and they were like, you can't drink the water, I'd be like, well, this is
it's like traveling in parts of Asia.
Yeah, exactly. And so like it's not really something you can count on. And so I kind of can justify why people don't want to get out of their comfort zone and go anywhere. But ultimately I do think it makes you a better person. It gave me an understanding of a city I'd never been to. You know, I'd never been to Texas, I'd never been to Austin, and now I have. And you know, a couple years ago, or until 2014, I'd never been to Tokyo, or you know.
Yeah, no, we're lucky. We get to go other places. I mean, I think it's one of those things that everyone should do because it sounds utterly pretentious. It is like an insufferable thing to say, but it is enriching and it changes your worldview. And if you go to another place, you learn how to interact with other people with a different walks of life. And
like you said, even if it's not on an airplane to a foreign country, it's to another town. It's to, you know, take a train, drive, take the bus to another state, go somewhere weird, go somewhere different. I mean,
read the Wikipedia article on like a town you've never been to and then go there and like be like a weird fan for that town.
Yeah.
Like people who live there probably don't know shit about that town, honestly.
There's probably stuff in your state that's completely different than where you live. Like whether you live in a city and you want to go check out something more rural or vice versa. Like I used to go camping in New Jersey with my high school girlfriend, my college girlfriend, because like it was like a 45-minute drive and we would end up in like a weird state park where there were like weirdly like, you know, caravans with like Confederate flags on them, and you'd be like, "Where are we? I thought we were in New Jersey. Like I thought New Jersey looked like this. I thought it was like turnpikes and highways, and you could see New York." And it's not. So it's good. It's good to turn around and try things new and change things up.
Well, it appears our camera has run out of batteries, so we've got to stop the video recording and might as well stop the audio too. If you enjoy this program in any form, you can support it over on patreon.com/weirdheat, and you can follow us both on Twitter. I'm Max Scoville. Brian is Agent Bizzle. Head over to the Weird Heat Facebook group. It's facebook.com/group/weirdheat and make some friends there. Tell your travel stories. Recommend your travel tips. I recommend going to like an exercise clothing store and getting some of those real weird skimpy little underpants because you can wash them in a sink and they dry fast.
That's a really good tip.
Cotton underwear, which is becomes stinky and wet.
Is that what you did?
I washed a lot of my underpants in the sink in Japan, and I felt like a weird weird European man.
Yeah, you can get your. Like they'll do your laundry at the hotel.
Yeah, I don't want to give my underwear to Japanese people. It's going to wind up in a vending machine. Anyway, thank you for listening. If you're watching, sorry the video cut out. I'll put up a nice JPEG of something. And on that note, we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
Bye.